Okay, as I go through this, please feel free to ask any questions that you want. I'll start out. What's an extension expert? Who knows this? Anybody that's more than 40 miles away from home, right? I'm not 40 miles from home, so I don't get to be an expert today. But I'll give it my best shot. What I'm going to do tonight is talk about the economics of some of the crop and livestock issues that you're dealing with here. One of the things we're going to talk about, they kind of gave me a really, really broad recipe that I had to kind of follow and say, see if you can kind of cover these topics in as much detail as you can in 15 minutes. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about some silage, hay, standing, forage. We'll talk about soybeans. We'll talk about corn. We're going to talk about some of the livestock options that you have. We're going to talk about these Acre payments. Have any of you guys considered that maybe Acre might pay this year? What do you guys think? What did we promise you back in 2008? We might have one good year of an Acre payment in this whole program. We might actually be on top of it. We'll talk about some of the FSA emergency loans that we have, some insurance options and opportunities that you have out there. And as we start to get into this, the first thing I have up there is our agreement. And I call it ketchup and milk. Except tonight we're not talking about ketchup and milk. Let's talk about toilet paper. And the reason I picked toilet paper is because on my way up to Yankton today, my wife gave me one job. Would you just go to the store and pick up some toilet paper for me? What do you think I said? Absolutely, dear. I'd love to. Let's go talk about toilet paper. So I went up to this massive Walmart that you have on the north end of town here in Yankton, and I went into the toilet paper aisle, and what do you think I found? That's the biggest wall of toilet paper I've ever seen in my life. I had every option of toilet paper you can imagine, from single roll all the way up to this 64 roll monster. And I'm sitting there staring at that, and I'm seeing Charmin and Northern and Basic brand and Walmart brand and everything from Feather Soft and Normal to Sandpaper Hard. And I had to pick out from this giant wall of toilet paper, what am I going to pick for my wife? Well, these extension programs are kind of running the same way. We're going to give you a whole lot of options out there in toilet paper. We're also going to give you a lot of options in programs. The thing is in that whole wall of toilet paper, they put them like that because somebody was buying it. So I'm going to give you a lot of different economic options out here. Maybe only one's going to work for you, and that's okay. I'm going to give them to you, but you get to choose which one you want. So if you see a couple of things here and you say, nope, it's full of hokey, I'm not buying that, that's okay. We're going to have that agreement. We'll just move on to the next option, because maybe the next 2 or 3 options down is the one that's going to work for your farm. So don't tone me out if you see something you don't like or maybe something that's a little weird. First thing you have to do when you're out on these farms and you're thinking about economics is you got to know what your yields are, right? Because if you don't know what the yield is, you're not going to maybe make the best decision. You're not going to know what options are available to you. Some different things when we start to take a look at corn, some rules of thumb. And these are really basic rules of thumb. Because a lot of times they work good in a normal year, but this is not a normal year. 1 ton of silage equals about 5 bushels of expected yield per acre. If you don't think you have any yield out there, and there's some farms out there that I've been on that don't have any yield. We've got some dryland farms that we're absolutely expecting a 0 yield. And maybe you have some up here in South Dakota as well. You can go down to the 1 ton of silage for 1 foot of plant height as an average across your field. And it'll give you an idea of what kind of material you're looking at out there. Am I expecting some kind of yield? Am I expecting some kind of silage? You know, what am I going to have there to work with? How many guys do estimated yields on your ears, pre-harvest ears? A lot of people don't know how to do this. And this is kind of a practice that we've gotten away from, but it's a really good one to get back into. Now all of this stuff, all these calculations, everything, they're in a handout on the back of the table. I'm not going to go through all these in detail because we simply don't have time. But just know they're back there and they're there for you to use. So the first thing you want to do is count out 50 foot of row space. Why 50 foot? Well, if you plant in 30-inch rows, what's 1,000th of an acre? 17.5 feet. Am I going to get a pretty good representation of that field in maybe 17.5 feet? Probably not. So we're going to say go ahead and count out 50 foot. It's going to give me more things to choose from, more things to see, give me some different, I'm going to see some different visual aspects. Count the rows of kernels you have. What are the rows? What counts as a row? Up or down or across? What is it? Rows, up and down. Kernels. How many kernels in that row? So what am I getting? kind of getting a geographic or a geometric distribution of the kernels that are on that ear. And I multiply those two together, and I'm going to get the number of kernels per ear. Then I count the number of ears I have in 50-foot a row, multiply it by this conversion, and that's going to tell me how many kernels I'm going to have out there per acre. I take the number of kernels I have, divide it by the kernels per bushel, and that's going to give me an approximation of how much yield I have out there. It's really important that you know what you're working with before you get in the combine and start running out there, so you know what your options are worth. In a typical year, we're probably going to see about 90 to 92,000 kernels per bushel. This isn't a normal year, is it? We're going to say probably going to see a lot of small kernels out there. Maybe we're going to take about 110,000 kernels to make a bushel. Once we know what we have out there, we can start to work on what we can do. If you're estimating soybeans, again, you can use the thousandth of an acre with soybean. It works a little bit better. You can also use the 50-foot a row, just like we did with corn. Basically, it's going to be the same thing. Plants per acre times pods per plant times seeds per pod, divided by the seeds per pound or pounds per bushel, or it's a lot easier just to take the plants per acre times pods per plant times seeds per pod, divided by the number of seeds I expect to see in a bushel. Typical year on soybeans, we're going to see approximately 150,000 seeds to make a bushel. But it's going to, again, give me some kind of indication of the number of bushels I have out there. This is a very rough estimate of your yield. How come? Well, how many of your guys' drought fields are uniform across the entire field? Not really. So when you go out to make this interpretation, it kind of depends on what you want to see, depends on where producers decide to choose in the field that they're going to do this test. If you expect to see really low yields, where do you check? Corners. Yep, especially in pivot fields. See, producers go immediately to the corners, and that's the one they're going to check, and what do you think they come up with? Nothing. Because the pivot didn't hit that, and we're going to have zero yield. Guys that really want to see a lot of bushels out there, where do they go? Right to the edge, yep, right to the center there where the best water has been, and it's been in a low area, and it's been yielding really well for several years. They'll go and check that area. So when you're doing this, it's not a bad idea to pick several locations around your field. And a lot of times when I check the field, I'm going to pick 10 different spots randomly. And I'm going to check those and find out what your yield's worth. Pricing the crop again, this is also a very rough estimate on what we have out there. Once we know what our yields are as far as either the bushels that we have or the silage that we're going to have out there, the very rough rule of thumb is that silage is worth about 1/3 the price per ton of good hay. Good silage, 7 to 8 times the price of shelled corn. But again, good silage, what constitutes good silage? What do you have to have? Corn. How much corn? If you're talking to your insurance adjuster, what's he think is going to make decent silage? Or what he would consider good? What is that number? Anybody know? Between 5 to 7 bushels per acre. He's going to at least give us in a marginal area of decent silage. In drought's going to be grain deficient, less than 5 bushels per acre. It's going to be worth 5 to 6 times the price of shelled corn, and that's going to be standing. If you're going to go ahead and harvest it yourself, 5 to 6 times the price of shelled corn, plus $2 to $2.50 per ton for your harvesting costs. If you're doing stalks, baled stalks are worth 80% of alfalfa energy content and 10% of the soybean meal to get to the protein that we're going to see in what we consider an alfalfa equivalent. You can also substitute in 22% of your DDGs per ton if those are available to you as an alternative. So take 80% of good hay, 10% of the soybean meal price, and we can approximate what we should be able to get for baled corn stalks. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the protein from the alfalfa. Alfalfa, let's just assume, is trading at $180 per ton. What is alfalfa trading for in South Dakota? Does anybody know? What is it in your area?
Log Valley is $350 per ton. That's right.
So what's that at?
That's Log Valley.
Log Valley, $350 per ton. Down in Nebraska, we're seeing right now when you're between 200, 205. Soybean meal, $500 per ton. Is that going to be pretty similar to what you guys see up here? Approximately.
Somewhere.
550, somewhere in there. Sure. Yeah, again, this is just an estimate. It's just an approximation. Every operation is going to be different. Every place you're going to check is going to have a little bit of a different price. What finally determines what the would the price of baled stalks and alfalfa hay go for? Is there a magic box I can bring up here to put up and we can feed some alfalfa into and it kicks a number out? What's the final determinant of price? Feed value. What else? Protein. What else? What's the economic term that we use for determining price? Supply and demand. Absolutely. I can give the best, I can put some cruddy hay up here. And if we get far enough into this drought, you think it'll go pretty high price? You bet it will. Yep. Supply and demand is going to be the final determinant on what this stuff is worth. But this is just to give you an approximation of what we can sell it for, what your options are. 80% of 180 and 10% of 500, subtract the two off, about $94 per ton for baled stocks. Are you guys buying baled stocks up here yet? The NASS numbers that we have down in Nebraska right now are putting them between $80 and $110, baled corn stalks. The question was asked earlier, what's the nutrient value that comes off of baled stalks? Anybody know? Who wants to guess? What's an approximation? How much money do you think comes off? Per acre. What's that?
50 to 75 bucks an acre.
Pretty darn close, yep. Depending on how many bales you pull off, we're saying about $12 to $13 per bale. Is about what you'll get. And that's going to come off. That's the nutrients that you then have to replace. So you got to consider that. Do you bale stocks every year? Some of the data we have down in Nebraska shows that on dry land field, if you take stalks off every year, you're decreasing your yield by 2 bushels per acre. Is it consistent on every field? Not necessarily, but it is on the fields that have been tested. Rule of thumb, baled stalks come for about half the price of good hay. Pretty consistent in this case. Looking at $200, $210 for alfalfa hay. Dropping that down about half is going to be your $94, $95 to $110 per bale. Again, Bruce alluded to this, and I think it's absolutely important. Know where you're buying from. Know when it was baled. And you might even think about having it tested before you buy it. I mean, it doesn't do you any good to get a really good feed that's then going to kill your cattle because it has high nitrates. So take that into consideration. Also, if you're going to be pricing some stocks, might want to be prepared to do a little bit of testing on those stocks. And I think if you can go out there and say, hey, this is low nitrate, I have a feed test here available from this set of bales, you might be able to demand a premium in this market. This is just a second method of doing it, using DDGs instead of using the soybean meal. Basically, we arrive at approximately the same value. But again, it's just to give you an evaluation of what you have out there and what it might be worth. If you haven't done this, estimating bale weights, how many of you guys do this? What's the easiest way to do it? Weigh the truck, load the truck, weigh the truck again, and you'll figure out about how much weight you have on there divided by the number of bales, and that'll get you an approximation. If you need to go out and do it in the field before you load them onto the truck, this is just another way of doing it. It gives you an approximation so you kind of know what's out there, what you have available, and what you can do with it. I won't go into that into great detail. Running stocks. This was also a question asked. This is generally not reported to NASS. We don't really have a survey out there that says how much you rent your stocks for. What I do is every meeting I go to, I generally ask the guys, what do you rent your stocks for? And this is generally the number that they give me, about $8 to $10 per animal unit month. Approximation. If I did a really cruddy job on harvesting, can this go up? Yeah, I got more corn in the field. I mean, that's really what I'm doing is I'm putting the cattle out there so they clean up the corn. So more corn in the field equals a little bit higher animal unit month rental charge. And usually the agreement on that is we're going to go ahead and graze these stocks, but only until the bottom of the stalks remain. Do I really want the cows out there in late gestation chawing off on those really tough stalks? Not necessarily. Not unless I'm going to be supplementing them. There's other methods out there to calculate your stock rental rates. Just know that there are other ways to do this, but this is kind of the average of what we've been seeing in Nebraska. Is this pretty consistent with what you see up here in South Dakota? $8 to $10 per animal? How many animals can you graze on a 2 to 3 month period on corn stalks? How many can you kick out there? 5? Maybe 5 animals per acre? Depending on if it's irrigated or dry land and how much residue is out there. It's going to depend a little bit. But that's going to get you somewhere in that vicinity of $30 to $50 per acre. Pricing soybeans, drought-stressed beans. This is the literature that I have because we don't really have a lot of information on it that's current or consistent. Talking to Bruce earlier, he says, hey, you know, you might be, and he's absolutely right. If you get into some really short beans, you may only have a 1/4 ton, maybe a 1/2 ton per acre of actual residue out there, of actual material. Some of the literature has said that on average we get 1.5 to 2 tons of dry matter material per acre. That's going to be variable. It's going to depend on the height of your beans and your planting rate, how many actual plants per acre you have out there. Again, in silage, you want to go ahead and wilt those down to 65% moisture. So to get 2 tons of dry matter, I'm going to need about 5.7 tons of actual material. If I harvest a hay, I need to dry it down to 30 to 35%. Why do we want to go ahead and get this down to 30 to 35%? What happens if we bale it too wet? Yeah, molds. Gets cruddy on us. Can't feed it. We're losing value. Any questions on the soybeans? Again, and we'll look at it here. Your maturity level is really going to depend on how much yield you have out there. And as you look at the different maturity levels, and I won't go through this in great detail, most of you guys already know this, where your levels are, is going to give you some indication of your dry matter yield, the percent moisture you're going to have in that plant, your crude protein, and your relative feed value. Why is relative feed value important? If I know my RFV, what can I compare it to? I can kind of compare it to alfalfa. Technically, RFV says that we should be comparing inside of similar feed groups. But in a drought situation, if we're kind of pressed, can we go ahead and make maybe a conversion, maybe think a little bit about in a pinch how this RFV is going to compare to alfalfa? We can. Mid-bud alfalfa hay, 150 RFV. You can kind of see the different maturity levels where we harvest those soybeans, what kind of RFV we're going to get. And we can make a ratio determination on what kind of price we can get for that. Bruce was absolutely right. You're going to see some soybean hay out there in that $120 to $180 range. It's worth quite a bit. Looking at some of our livestock options, some things you have to really consider, some things you really have to look at, and this is just a very basic decision tree that a lot of livestock producers are having to deal with right now. First off, are your feed resources adequate? Well, depending on how you answer that question, if you answer yes, the one thing you need to really think about in this particular year is maybe we need to plan for some multi-drought options. Now, this is some of the things that we found out from the guys down in Nebraska. The last couple of years have been really good. We've stockpiled a lot of feed resources, reserves. Our guys got kind of to where they were feeling bad for the guys down in Texas and up in western South Dakota, and they sold those resources off. And then we got into this year and we had a drought. And now those resources aren't available to us. So think about if you have enough resources for this year, it was alluded to, plan for next year. Plan for the worst. We don't know if this is going to be a multi-year drought or not. If you don't have adequate resources, are alternate resources available? What constitutes an alternate resource? Pretty much anything I can feed the cow, or the calf, or the feeder, whatever I need. Stalks, hays, grass, baled feeds, commercial feeds, CRP ground. There's a lot of different options that are available to you. Is that something that I can do? Can I make up my inadequate resources with stuff that's available to me? If the answer is yes, the next question is it feasible? Feasibility looks like, am I going to make a profit all this? And if I can't make a profit, am I going to minimize my loss? Now, all these different feed alternatives need to be run through your nutrition program to find out if it's going to be something that's going to work for your herd. If it's not going to be feasible for your herd and it's going to cost you more money, we need to consider some other options. If they are feasible, can you maintain your herd size? If you can maintain your herd size, again, start planning for that multi-year drought today. What kind of feed resources and reserves can I get a hold of now that I can hold on until next year? If none of these options are available, you're going to have to start thinking about reducing herd size. Do we want to reduce herd size? Not if we don't have to. I mean, it's kind of a last-ditch option, but the reality is am I going to go hungry by not selling off some of these cattle and reducing my herd size? If the answer is yes, I get to go hungry, then this is something I really need to consider. What can I do inside of my herd that's going to reduce my size so I can get it down to the resources I have available? If I can reduce my herd size, can I early wean calves? What's the advantage of early weaning calves as far as cost? Which is more efficient? A calf on a cow or a calf on grain? Calf on grain, absolutely. He's going to be 4 times more efficient by using those other feed resources without having to put them through the cow first. So maybe early weaning is my option. If I can early wean calves and maintain my cow herd size, maybe that's something I really need to consider. If I can't do that, can I sell cows off? And Bruce was talking about it we were kind of discussing between ourselves. They're actually starting to apply some pretty serious discounts at the sales barn for pregnant cows. Who wants a pregnant cow? Nobody right now, because a lot of the cows that are coming through, we're trying to get rid of them so we don't have to feed them. So they're actually applying a discount. If I can sell cows off, if I can't do that, maybe I need to redefine my operational goals. And I've got some guys that are basically doing that. I can't sell any cows off, I don't have resources to feed them. What am I supposed to do? What do you do? What do you do when you get in that situation? Well, one of the things I need to do is, maybe I need to think about finding another job. Maybe I need to find something I can do in the meantime. If I just absolutely cannot get rid of any of these cows, these are my, I'm just not going to do them. The kids have already named them. We're going to use them for 4-H animals. There's no way I can get rid of them. I got to hold on to them. I'm going to have to start thinking about some other things outside the operation that I need to do. The Acre program. How many guys from Nebraska in the room? Couple? Okay. Well, this is basically your Acre program for Nebraska. I'll go through it really quick. Basically what we're looking at is the state yield, our guaranteed price, the crop price, the break-even, and the estimated crop price coming out of NASS. Now the one thing we know is this guaranteed price, or this crop guarantee right here, these numbers don't necessarily add up if you multiply them together. And the reason for that is because the Acre program told us that we could only vary our Acre program guarantee by 10% from one year to the next. So this number actually represents a 10% increase from the previous year, not necessarily what we're going to see off the state yield and the state price benchmark. Using the last estimated crop price that came out of NASS for Nebraska, and you're going to see the same thing for South Dakota the next slide, this kind of gives us a break-even NASS yield. At what point at this price do we start to see the Acre program pay for itself? If you're in Nebraska, if you're getting under 85 bushels of corn on dry land, there's a chance that this Acre program is going to pay. Irrigated fields, 129. Let's take a look real quick at South Dakota. Now that's a nice thing about Nebraska is we get to break it into irrigated and dry land. So we get more columns on the chart. In South Dakota, you don't get that. You only get corn and soybean. But then you don't have to worry about that thing called irritation, right? In dryland corn or dry corn and state yield, yours was 133. Your crop guarantee was 514.50 approximately. Your break even at $5.90 is 87 bushels. Do you think you maybe have a couple of fields out there that are going to yield under 87 bushel dryland? There's going to be a few. Might be a few. Now, this is not a guarantee. Why is this not a guarantee? Is this set in stone? Nope. This is a moving target. We won't actually know what the state guarantee is until when? September 1. We're going to have this number September 1 because that's when the 2011 marketing year actually ends. August 30th to September 1 to August 30th. And they're going to publish this number to get us this number so we can divide this into this and figure out what our actual number of bushels we're going to need is. The problem with this number here is, when do we find out what the 2012 marketing year is going to bring us? When do we find that out? August 30th of 2013. So if you're in the Acre program, even if you do qualify, you may not get an actual payment until next year. Actually, I guarantee you won't get a payment until next year. Crop guarantees cannot change by more than 10%. It says when the marketing year is. Again, we won't know what our guarantee is until September 1 of this year, and we won't know if you get a payment until September 1 of next year on this program. Livestock disaster programs, did we get any this year? Nope. They ran out 1 year early, right? When was the last time we could submit for disaster programs for livestock? September 30 of 2011. Yep, that's when the programs ended. And this current farm bill does not extend those into the 2012 year. So we don't have them. So what do we have available? We lost LIP, we lost the forage disaster program. Sure's not even available this year. And now it's supposed to come in and kind of save us. It was supposed to boost that insurance program that you had. Now it's not available. Secretary of Ag is working with Congress. They're considering different options as far as disaster assistance. But again, we're no longer into that area of mandatory spending and the discretionary spending. Now we're looking at what kind of money can Congress pull together to start helping out crop and livestock producers. How much money do you think is in Congress's checkbook? Well, it depends on how much you can print, right? Insurance. If you take the field for some other purpose, now if you're out there and you've got some crops, before you do anything with that field, contact your insurance agent. It's especially important that you do that. What happens if you start doing something on that farm and you don't call him? What happens to your insurance program? Void. You get nothing. Yep, you got to give him a call and say, hey, I'm going to do something with this field that's other than what I have on my policy. And he's going to say, that's fine. Let me send an adjuster out. We'll make some determinations on what we can do for your farm. Let's start adjusting the crop. He comes out and he adjusts your crop and he says, you know what I'm going to have you do? I'm not going to have you harvest right now. Let's just go ahead and put your check rows in. Everybody knows what check rows are, right? What do they look like? What do they constitute? What are they? 4 or 5 rows. How long are they?
Field length.
Field length, whole field. How many?
4 for the first 10 acres and then 4 for every 40 acres after that.
Say it louder.
4 for the first 10 acres and 4 for every 40 after that.
Yep, 4 rows for the first 10 acres and 4 rows for every 40 acres after that. So you're going to have a number of check rows out there. Now here's the thing. Once they come out and they say this is where your check rows are going to be, and they're going to work with you to determine where those are at, you have still got to manage those just like it was an entire field of corn. So what's the pest that we're dealing with right now?
Spider mites.
Spider mites. You got to manage those 4 or 5 rows for spider mites just like you would with the rest of the field? Yes, you do. What happens if you don't do that? Then you're not following best management practices for that crop and that check row is now void. What happens to your policy? It's in jeopardy. Yep, so you got to manage that crop. If you guys don't have irrigation, it's not as big a deal, but imagine having to irrigate 1 check row or 4 check rows through the entire field. It gets to be kind of a pain. Again, got to follow the best management practices as recommended by the land grant institution that the state that you're in, SDSU, UNL, whatever the case may be, whatever state you're in. And if you need any updates on that, it's in CCIP section 14 and 20D. You guys wanted to know that, right?
Suppose weed control would count.
Weed control, pest control, disease control, just like the entire field was there. Yep. Yep.
There's a lot of lambs quarter.
What's that?
A lot of lambs quarter coming.
Yeah, weeds, lamb's quarter. Does that mean you necessarily have to go out and spray it? No, not necessarily. If there's not a whole lot there, maybe I just run a mower over it. I just got to control it. It doesn't say how I have to control it. Universities are going to say you can have different options as far as controlling weeds, be it chemical, mechanical, sending your kid out with a weed whacker, whatever the case may be. I've done it. When your kid screws up, that's the best thing you do is hand him a corn knife or a weed whacker and say, have fun, boy. Out you go. Yep. Some of the different things that are available to you. Some of the emergency farm loans, FSA's put these out. These funds may be used to restore or replace essential property that you may have lost during the drought, pay all or part of your production costs, pay essential farm living expenses, reorganize your farm operation. Sometimes drought is going to force a reorganization of what you have out there. It's going to be able to refinance your debts, excluding real estate. Can't redo that, but you can do everything else. Maximum limit of emergency loan is $500,000. To be qualified for an emergency loan, you have to be designated as a federal disaster area. You got to have some kind of federal agency say, yep, this is a disaster area. The one thing I did have, and I just pulled it off today, is the list of Nebraska counties. I couldn't find the South Dakota counties right offhand, but we'll get those to you. Must be declared by the President or designated by the Secretary of Ag as a primary disaster or quarantine area. And then if you're in a contiguous county, you also qualify. So emergency loans is something that's out there, might be able to help you out a little bit. Other things that are out there, disaster set-aside program, we're still finding out what that's going to be like, the emergency conservation program, and emergency CRP hay and graze. Has South Dakota qualified for emergency CRP hay and graze? Yeah, most counties and I think everything except this very southern corner of Nebraska did qualify. I think a good portion of South Dakota did too. Take advantage of that. It gives you an opportunity to go out. There's going to be a penalty for that emergency CRP. What's your penalty this year? 10%. Now, here's the caveat to that 10%. If I'm a livestock producer and it's my land, I take the 25% hit. If I then take that land and I rent it out to another qualifying livestock producer, how much can I charge for him to graze the ground? No more than the 10% that I'm penalized for the emergency hay and graze. So you can't go out and gouge livestock producers. If I hay that ground, I can't sell the hay to I can, if it's my hay, I can sell the hay for whatever I want. If I have somebody come in and hay it for the use of livestock, again, I can't collect any more than that 10% I would from the penalty that I incur. If you're going to be using the emergency CRP, contact the FSA and let them know what you're doing. Because they get pretty worked up when you don't call them and they drive around your farm and find a bunch of bales sitting out there. They need to know what's going on with your program. That was really, really quick. Any questions that we have on some of the economics? Quickly, yes, sir.
You had silage up there, $2.50 a ton to do it harvested, where our people I talked to are charging $6.50 to $10 a ton
For which one now?
for corn silage, cut silage, custom cut.
Yep. The question is 2.5, that's average. And that's across, that's Kansas, South Dakota, Colorado, Iowa, and Wyoming. So there's a range in there. And the range I've seen is everything from $1 to $15. So your harvest cost is going to be dependent on what machinery you have available and what your cost will be. That 2.5 is not a hard figure. I was just using that as a placeholder to say, whatever your harvest costs are for putting those bales up or putting that silage up, you need to add that into your economics so you have a good consideration of what your options are.
And what's a fair value for last year's soybean straw? And also what's a fair value for the CRP hay that's going to be coming off of that?
Well, the CRP hay is going to be, it's going to be dependent on what species you have out there. Do you have a good bead on what kind of stuff they're going to see coming off of there?
How much trash and previous years is mixed in with it.
You want to say that, or are we doing just the
I've heard $40 a ton. That's
from last year's?
well, no, cutting and bale here.
Okay. Yeah, anywhere between 15 and 35 is what I've heard, depending on what kind of machinery that's out there and whether they're putting up rounds or squares. And then also if they're taking it directly from the farm to the holding place, or if they're leaving it on the field. Yeah, that harvesting cost is all over the board right now. Usually we could narrow it in a little bit as it's becoming more drought and there's more demand for some of these resources, the prices go up.
What about soybean? Old soybean there?
Old soybean bales. Who wants to buy some old soybean bales? What do you bid? He'll buy some. I couldn't tell you. That really does go by supply and demand. My expectation would be you could always have it checked against the protein and the energy and see what's available and see what people will bid for it. As far as
Feed value is less than wheat straw.
yeah,
It's less than.
yeah, soybean stubble is not worth a whole lot. What about old bales, old corn stalk bales? Can you still feed those? Yeah. Are they going to be as good as this year's? No. That's like going for the old Twinkie in the box instead of the one that mom just bought. Yeah, it's not as good. And there's going to be some variation in how you discount that. But do consider if you've got some old hay bales out there, some old corn stalk bales, they are going to have value because the demand for that resource is high. So everything's going to have value. Yes, sir.
I just heard that on some of this land chopping off now, NRCS in some of those areas along the right in this area in the red on the drought monitor, they're going to be paying something like $37 an acre for cover crops. Is
Yep.
that right?
Yeah, the question is, okay, so now I've got this field out here. I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and take it for corn silage, and I chop her all off. Is the NRCS going to say you must still provide a cover crop? As of this morning, yes. But here's the neat thing about NRCS is they're kind of like the EPA. They may decide on Monday that they're not going to apply that rule. They kind of have that ability.
It won't germinate.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the biggest questions we've had is, okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put a cover crop in. What do I put in? Well, what are your major options? What can you get a hold of? Ryegrass? What's the other big one? Radishes, turnips, and you can speak, if you want to talk about some of the grazing turnips, and yeah, there's a lot of different things you can put down, but what's it going to cost you? The other big one I hear is oats. A lot of guys want to put oats down with ryegrass. Can you do it? Sure you can. I can put anything I want down in the soils that are going to germinate. I don't know. It depends if we get some of those September, October, November rains. But as it stands right now, yeah, NRCS is going to say you still have to maintain the cover that you're going to have with your conservation program. Still got to put it down. What's it costing? Well, we started out with ryegrass in Norfolk at $18. Now we've got it up to $42. So the demand for the rye seed is starting to go up, and the other oats and everything else that you put in there, price is going up because demand is up and supply is coming down. So do consider that. If you have to put a conservation cover out there, probably need to get out there and get that seed purchased while you still can. Did you want to talk about turnips, or what other questions?
You didn't have a formula up there for straw, since he brought up straw. Is there a formula back there for straw?
Yes, it's back there also, yet.
When do you determine, it's just so much for this hay, you guys start liquidating?
So when do you make that decision?
Yeah.
When you make the decision where buying more hay bales and corn stalk bales and everything else just costs too much? That's going to be dependent on your financial situation. If you're very strong asset position and you can take a couple of hits, you may decide that you're going to go ahead and limit your losses and continue to purchase hay with the intent that you're going to have that livestock available for next year. Another operator in the room may decide $110 or $120 for corn stalks and $220 for alfalfa is just too much. My feasibility says that I need to go ahead and start liquidating my herd. Is this drought going to break some guys? Yep, it's going to. Absolutely it will. Some guys are just not going to be very good asset position. They're not going to be able to handle that kind of hit.
I'd say you have to consider though too, there's a carryover on pasture land one year to the next, and as widespread as this is,
Yep.
there probably won't be a ton of hay still available next year.
Yeah, and that's why when we had that chart up there, start planning for next year. I would not make the assumption that this drought is over after this year. And even if it is over, like was alluded to there, and Bruce talked about also, these pastures are not going to recover like they had in the past. So that feed resource may not be available to you.
I know you didn't bring this up, but if a person's liquidating a herd with the intent of maybe getting back in, I made a comment to one of the ladies on the telephone about how it would work with the IRS. Do you have any, I know you can defer it, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, there's two different programs you can work with. One is called the 451E. The 451E, it's a specific declaration that you can make with the IRS that says that, and that constitutes all livestock categories. And what it is it's a program that says that because of these drought conditions or any environmental condition, you're going to sell livestock in excess of normal. And your normal is determined by your 3-year average sales. The problem with that is who determines what excessive is? The IRS does. So if you've got a 5,000 head feedlot and because of this drought you're selling 5 extra animals, is that excessive? Maybe this year it will be. It all kind of depends on the IRS agent that you talk to or whoever looks at your file. Once you get that into your file, the other thing you have to have is a declaration of disaster. Or you have to be in a contiguous county. Once you have that, you then qualify the program, and what you can do is take the sales from those livestock that you have been forced to liquidate, and you can defer the income for 1 year. And it's from the year of the date of the sale was made. Once that sale is made, you got 365 days to determine what you're going to do with that money. You don't have to go back into livestock. If you do choose to go back into livestock, what they will do is say, if you sold a $700 calf and you bought an $800 cow, you've actually got a $100 loss. You're not going to pay any capital gains income on the sales of the drought livestock. If it's an even wash, you don't pay anything on that capital gain. If you make money, you sell a $500 or $700 calf and you buy a $200 calf back, you've made a $200 capital gain, you do owe for that.
Defer your crop insurance? Is there a form for that or something?
Deferred premium payments or your income?
Proceeds.
Yeah, proceeds, I don't know about that. It kind of,
There's a line
There's-
on your schedule F.
yeah,
If you normally sell your crop,
yes.
you hold it
Yep.
and then sell it the following year, I think you're right.
yeah, you can't do that. It kind of depends on your operation.
You're out.
I thought there was a special designation that it's said differently than being a drought. If you didn't have 1 year, I thought you had
Yep.
up to 4 years.
Okay, the other program you can qualify for counts only for breeding livestock, and that's called your 1033E. The 1033E, again, only counts for livestock. You do not have to have a secretarial designation or federal designation to defer your income for up to 2 years. If you do have a secretarial declaration, you can defer for up to 4 years. And again, it's the same thing. The advantage of the 1033 is you get more time, and you also don't have to repurchase livestock. If you're in the 451E and you want to defer that income or that taxable gain, you have to go back into a similar category livestock. If you're in the 1033, you can say, because of this drought, there's absolutely no way I can get back into livestock production. I'm going to put this towards a different type of asset, and they'll let you do that. Again, you don't have to have a secretarial designation. There are some other rules in there. It has to be a declaration not of the county that you live in, but the county where the livestock are located. Your primary occupation has to be livestock or agricultural production. That's the main hit points. The other thing with that, consider your options under both the 1033E. 1033, if all you have out there is breeding livestock, and breeding livestock is categorized fairly well. There's no holding period for that. So if you purchased breeding heifers, let's just say in March or April, with the intent of using them next year for your program, and you're forced to sell them this year, they count as breeding livestock. So you can go ahead and take the 1033E on those. That kind of answer that one? Or at least somewhat? Okay. The one thing I do encourage you to do, once you decide what you're doing with your livestock, if you do have to do some liquidations, contact your tax attorney or your tax guy, because he's going to tell you which one of those programs is going to work best for your operation.